Joining me now is the Russian opposition politician Vladimir Kara-Murza. Beyond being a great friend of the show, he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning contributing columnist to The Washington Post. He was imprisoned, as you know, in Russia for more than 2 years, from April 2022 to August 2024, for speaking out against Vladimir Putin and his war in Russia. Vladimir, it's good to see you. Thank you for being with us again. Talk to me about these.
Good morning, Ali. It's always good to be on your program.
Thank you. Talk to me about these so-called negotiations. Vladimir Zelensky, what happened to him in the White House was just very, very unusual. It was unprecedented. But he doesn't have a lot of choices. He cannot afford to tell America to get lost. We're going to go it alone. Europe and NATO are preparing for that possibility. But let's talk a little bit about what role Ukraine has and should play in these so-called negotiations.
Well, first of all, it's important to say that the best that we can hope for, and what we are talking about now, is a temporary ceasefire, because we cannot talk about peace for as long as Vladimir Putin remains in power. Because for as long as he remains in power, he will continue to kill, he will continue to attack, he will continue to wage wars, because that's what he has been doing for the past 25 years. We know who this man is. He's not a secret. For as long as there's a regime, an authoritarian, belligerent, repressive regime in the Kremlin that will not respect its own laws and that will trample on the rights and freedoms of our own citizens, it is not going to respect the borders of our neighbors. It is not going to respect civilized norms of international behavior. The only real long-term lasting guarantee, not only of peace in Ukraine, but of peace, security, and stability on the European continent as a whole, is a democratic Russia. That is a goal that should be the common goal of the free world. And obviously, we're seeing something very opposite from the new American administration. But in terms of the ceasefire, we hear a lot of talk about territory. We hear a lot of talk about power stations. We hear a lot of talk about rare earth minerals and whatever else. We don't hear enough talk about people. You know, hundreds of thousands of lives have been lost as a result of this war of aggression launched by Vladimir Putin's regime. But there are tens of thousands of lives of people who can still be saved, and these are the captives of this war. I'm talking about POWs on both sides, of course, but also Ukrainian civilian hostages, thousands of people who have been abducted and are being illegally held in Russian prisons and detention facilities. I'm talking about thousands of abducted Ukrainian kids, which is an internationally recognized war crime, which was the reason the International Criminal Court issued its arrest warrant and indicted Vladimir Putin as a war criminal. And I'm also speaking about Russian political prisoners, those Russian citizens who are in jails right now for speaking out against Putin's war in Ukraine. Just 2 days ago, a historian and journalist from St. Petersburg, Alexander Skobov, who is 67 years old, received a 16-year prison sentence, which is a death sentence for him, for his posts on social media and for participating in an opposition conference. And today, this morning, Ali, just to illustrate what the situation in Russia is today under Vladimir Putin, who is not a bad guy, apparently, according to the White House special envoy. This morning, on Sunday morning, a Russian Orthodox priest was arrested right in the middle of the service in St. Petersburg and taken to a police station, put under arrest for posting a photo on his social media with the Ukrainian flag and a verse from the Bible, quoting from the 3rd book of Kings, that ye shall not go up and fight against your brethren. This is the situation in Russia today. Vladimir Putin, who claims to be this protector of traditional Christian values, is arresting Christian priests in Russia for opposing his murderous war of aggression against Ukraine.
You and your late friend, Alexei Navalny, have made this argument for many years that the answer is going to be a democratic Russia. Is there any sense from you today versus 2 years ago when you were in jail versus 10 years ago when we started talking, that goal is achievable in the short to medium term?
That goal is absolutely achievable because, you know, we saw within our own lifetimes the collapse of a much stronger totalitarian regime, that of the Soviet Union, which collapsed in 3 days. And this is, by the way, how things usually happen in Russia. Both the Tsarist regime at the beginning of the 20th century and the Soviet regime at the end of the 20th century went down in 3 days, very literally. And nobody saw it coming. Nobody was prepared for it. The very nature of one-man totalitarian dictatorships, like the dictatorship of Vladimir Putin, is that they are, of course, inherently illegitimate because they do not depend on the mandate from their own people. They're inherently unstable because, by definition, that's the most unstable system there can be, a system that's dependent on one person. And yes, Russia can change at any time, and there's absolutely no reason to think or to say that, you know, there are some peoples and some nations on this planet that are not ready, not prepared for democracy. This is offensive, this is insulting, but most importantly, this is not true. I think the best response to this kind of view was given by President Ronald Reagan in his famous Westminster address more than 4 decades ago, when he said that it is cultural condescension or worse implying racism, to say that there's any nation on the face of this earth that would voluntarily choose dictatorship over democracy. This goes for any country. This certainly goes for Russia as well. But, you know, this change in Russia requires support and strategy from the free world, from the democratic world, because again,
Yes.
It is in all of our interests to have a normal, legitimate, democratically elected government in Russia that would respect both the rights and freedoms of our own people and that would respect the borders of our neighbors. But we are seeing something exactly the opposite from the new American administration over these past 2 months. I cannot think back to any American president in the past of either party who had so openly sided with an autocratic aggressor against a democratic country that is the victim of aggression. And everything the Trump administration has been doing, from, you know, closing down all the democracy assistance program, from shutting down U.S. International broadcasting, that, by the way, played a crucial role in bringing the collapse of the communist regimes, because we all remember those radio broadcasts that, you know, were beamed across the Iron Curtain to reach millions of people inside the Soviet bloc, inside the Warsaw Pact. And it was one of the most important factors in the collapse of communist regimes, was that they were delegitimized in the eyes of their own people because people saw the truth about them. Well, what we're seeing now is the opposite. We're seeing the current American administration actually helping these totalitarian regimes like Putin's, but not only like Putin's, because this broadcasts are ended everywhere. They're helping these regimes to hide the truth from their own peoples. And of course, even at the level of messaging. You know, I can tell you, Ali, when I was in prison, it was really important to me. It was a great source of moral support to know that the free world supports us, stands on the side of us, Russian political prisoners who are opposed to Putin, who are opposed to his war in Ukraine. And it was important to hear these messages, you know, in the glimpses of information I would get in letters or from my lawyer when he would come to visit. I'm horrified to think what the current political prisoners in Russia, people like Alexander Skobov, whom I mentioned, people like this Orthodox priest, Father Nikolai Savchenko, who was arrested in St. Petersburg today. I'm horrified to think how they are sitting in those prison cells and listening to the supposed leader of the free world, although I think Mr. Trump has relinquished any claim to that title, openly siding with the dictator, with the aggressor, against people who believe in democracy and against the victims of aggression. This is absolutely unfathomable. This is shameful. And I don't think there's any precedent to this in the modern history.
I hope they hear the rest of our voices, though, who say, no, we're not going to forget about you. We're not on this team that says that it's OK what Vladimir Zelensky, what Vladimir Putin is doing. Vladimir, good to see you, my friend. Thank you, as always. Vladimir Kara-Murza, the Russian opposition politician and the Pulitzer Prize winning contributor to the Washington Post.